Hello, and welcome to Movies We Dig, the podcast about film, antiquity, and everything in between. I'm Colin McCormick.
I'm Elijah Fleming.
And I'm Christy Vogler.
And today we're talking about Blood of Zeus, the Netflix animated fantasy series created by Charlie and Vlas Parlanidis. And joining us today is also a very extra special guest. Returning to talk about this show, we have Zoe E. Thomas, a defending graduate student at the University of Texas at Austin and graduate coordinator for the Society of Classical Studies. Welcome, Zoe.
Hello, thank you for having me back.
Of course. Well, you were literally top of our list when we were like, well, Blood of Zeus season 2 is coming out, so we gotta hit up Zoe.
Finally. Finally. Also, I just wanted to mention, Colin, this is the first time our audience will be hearing from you in a month or so. So I just wanted to point out that we didn't slip him a poison fig or anything, you guys. Here he is.
He is alive.
I'm not sure anyone was worried or asking. But yes, I am alive and well. I'm just in the midst of moving sort of between states and countries and things like that right now. But we will start with our guest with typical questions. So Zoe, first sort of, what's your history and relation with Blood of Zeus? And did you dig season 2 that just came out this past May?
Well, as for my previous experiences, they have mostly revolved around this podcast in particular. And I really dug season 1, and I dig season 2. It's very different, I think, in my opinion, from season 1. But I dig it. Mm-hmm. I dig it.
With qualms.
Well, I don't know about qualms. One of the things that has happened since we recorded from the first season is I have a publication coming out specifically about how Demeter gets vilified in modern reception of Persephone and Hades.
Yeah.
And so I was really excited by this opportunity for modern media. And I like the way that they handled it a little bit more than I've liked it in other mostly romance genre receptions. Mm-hmm. But she's still a little bit of a villain. So, yeah. That's my little sticking point, I think, mostly this season. But yeah.
Yeah, I figured that was going to be one of the big things we talk about for this, because I know we've discussed lore a little bit before, and it feels like when it comes to the story of Persephone, you have to either vilify either Hades or Demeter. There's no alternative, it seems like, most of the time. So I am excited to delve into that with you a bit more today.
Yeah, I've got my notes.
Yes.
I'm ready.
Nice.
So Chris, did you dig it?
I actually really dug this season. It was the first bingeable TV show in a while, because we just got done with Spartacus and that was not bingeable. This was. I went through it so fast. I loved it. There's so many Easter eggs, which I think is really fun, and we'll touch on. There's the archaeological Easter eggs, there's the myth Easter eggs, and then there's the media Easter eggs. It's just borrowing so much, and so I'm really excited to unpack some of those today. So yeah, I dug it for sure.
I think we all know that I am still the stick in the mud about just animation in general. It's not my preferred media to consume.
You've said this before to me, but every time I find myself being surprised. But
yeah,
I know. I think this is a best case scenario for me. I think this was really, really fun. And I think after watching Spartacus, it is also fun to see just what you can do in animation that you really can't do in live action. I think it's the media really lends itself to Greek mythology. And so I did enjoy it in that aspect. And I do love how it's they're shorter episodes. They're very, very bingeable, as Christy says. And so, yeah, it was really fun to just crunch down. And I did enjoy myself, but I feel like I still have to put an asterisk on it. I'm it's probably not my first choice still, but I still think it was really good. And weirdly enough, I think I liked Seraphim more this season.
Oh, I think he very much carried the season, I think, for the show and also in a lot of fans' hearts. I don't know if you've had any time to look on the internet about what people are saying about the show,
certainly.
But it heavily revolves around Seraphim.
Yeah, he's Yeah.
I remember our first time recording when I thirsted over his voice actor's voice, and I
Mhm.
didn't expect that this would reach a wider audience than it did. I somehow conveniently forgot what the nature of a podcast is and that it is publicly available. So I'm on board with them.
Mm.
We're so used to like nobody reading what we say that like when even if it's like 10 people.
All right, how about you, Colin? What'd you think?
I'm also a little mixed. There's parts I really like. I found myself really sort of combing through. There's like you said, there's lots of Easter eggs, both visual name drops and call outs and things like that. I think as I was sort of I was holding in reservation because like Zoe mentioned, right, this is very much a Hades+Persephone sort of anchor piece, which is, a dimension of myth that has been done again and again to greater or lesser success. A lot of it revolves around, like Christy was saying, right, who you try, like who ends up getting vilified or deified, and like can you thread that middle path, and the implications of doing it one or the other that you see various genres. So like because that was so central to the series and this season in particular, I was kind of like just sort of waiting to be like, well, where are they going to go with it? And then in the end, I think I ultimately liked it more than dug it more than not. And part of it also made sense as this is unlike the first season. One of the ways it's so different from the first season is this season feels like very much a setup for kind of what the show really wants to get to.
Mhm.
So it has a little bit of like, this is all just sort of tee up that. And then there's a couple of other bits here and there of, the sort of, there's elements that get carried over from the first season that sort of feel like a little bit of just kind of hanging on, or I don't even want to say dead weight, but like it's just sort of stuff there that sort of doesn't really necessarily have a very tight focus, whereas the first season was pretty tightly plotted and this one is a little more sort of laying out chess pieces. But overall, yeah, I dug it. So should we just get right into the Hades Persephone of it all?
Yeah, I think we have
Yeah.
to.
Or,
Yeah.
or we could dance around it for like 20 minutes.
No,
But then,
I think I always like when, well, I don't know. It's refreshing in one way to see Persephone as like a very active role in just her
Yes.
relationship, choosing, to be in love in this way, and like she has, kids, and she really loves this relationship and has agency.
Mhm.
And I feel like, and I did not re-listen to our last conversation, but I know that in our previous talk about Lore Olympus, it's like there's maybe some just like, I don't know, washing away of the violence of the story of Persephone and Hades, but I like giving her agency, and so I enjoyed that she was just another actor in this story and wanted to be with the person that she loved, and I enjoyed that part.
I was a huge fan of horse girl goth princess Persephone.
Yes.
That's
Mhm.
not
Yes,
the
queen.
kind of Persephone that we get a lot of, actually. In most of the receptions that I've reviewed, she's often, well, and not to bring Lore Olympus back into it, but
But it's
in a
hard not
lot
to
of,
talk about this
It's hard
without
not to.
invoking
Yeah.
yeah,
and to a lesser
I've,
extent, Hades.
yeah,
Yeah.
Hades doesn't have quite the same problem as Lore Olympus with the Madonna whore complex and
Mhm.
Persephone, where she is this virgin goddess character, but she's also like so sexy just
Mhm.
all the time. And it was really nice to see a version of Persephone who, one, the main conflict with her mom wasn't the virginity thing, it was her mom's trying to marry her.
Mhm.
So I thought that was a nice spin on it. We don't get a lot of that aspect of their relationship at all. And I liked Persephone as
Yeah.
a character in this season. I thought she was really well rounded. It was so fun to see Zagreus and Melly, especially since
Yeah.
Hades 2 just came out, or just
Mhm.
early access just came out. So it was
Yep.
like, all my loves coming together in one
Mhm.
little season.
And this should feels very much aware. The show feels like very aware of like the popularity of other media out there, because it felt
Yeah.
like that their inclusion specifically felt very much like a sort of a nod to like
I
Mhm.
Hades.
think so, because the last time we talked about this, it had been like a year after Blood of Zeus came out, and at the time Hades was huge, especially coming out of the pandemic. So like, yeah, I think the Parloponides brothers are very aware of all the pop culture stuff going on around them and incorporating that into the show, which is really cool. And I think to kind of Elijah's point of like Persephone having agency, what I also really liked was the relationship with Hades was very much portrayed as a partnership. Like she is just as invested in this plan, and they frame it really well of like getting justice for their circumstances. Like they just want a solution to their problem because they want to be together as a family.
Mm-hmm.
And then it becomes but you know, when does that become selfish at some point? And
Right.
I think they threaded that really well overall. So yeah, I really liked the relationship. And you know, like I mentioned, it's like you always have to have kind of a weird villain in the story of Persephone. I like that Ares gets to be kind of the villain in the story of Persephone. That was really fun.
I'm almost wondering, like, because we talk a lot about how Hades often gets vilified in popular media, and then Ares is the other one. But I was wondering, like, no one ever wants like a justice for Ares. Everybody's like totally fine with a heel. You know, even since the Iliad, like everybody's clowning on him.
Mm-hmm.
But sorry, that was just like a passing thought I had about like, yeah, like, are we ever going to get the reclamation of Ares that isn't like a kind of uber fascist white nationalist movement? But
maybe. I mean, Aphrodite's hanging out with him, and I think the only plus I'm going to give to the Disney Percy Jackson is I really did like the depiction of Ares in that one.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you could do something there with Aphrodite. I kind of don't like Aphrodite right now because she just really feels like a hanger on to Ares when she's so much more powerful.
She has like mean girl energy or something.
Yeah.
She's like dating the quarterback.
Isn't it what do they call them? The Chad and the Stephanie or whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever. Yeah. You know, prom king and queen sort of vibes.
Yes.
Going on. Yeah. You can't sit with us.
I mean, I felt like we got just a touch of her power at the end when she summons up like this giant tornado out of the blue in the battle scene in that I think it's the last episode. And it made me all excited because of Venus and clouds in the Aeneid and like spiriting away Aeneas and hiding him in little windstorms. And I guess also Paris gets
she does
spirited away in the Iliad. And so I liked that nod, but I wanted more of her. And I don't even hate the idea of like a catty, mean girl Aphrodite. I think Xena, Warrior Princess, does this really well. Of their Aphrodite is like a catty mean girl, but sort of without any of the intentionality behind it. She's just kind of a goddess doing goddess things. And I really hope we get to see more of her because, like you said, Christy, she feels like she's really hanging on kind of character for Ares, and I would love to see her be catty on the main stage.
Bringing it back, actually, I did want to just touch back on something back to Persephone and Demeter, but something that Zoe said, like, I like, you said, like, you know, I like how Persephone kind of leans into the underworld, or maybe the underworld manifests in her, where like she, you know, when we see her before she meets Hades, it's very much like sort of gardener, flower child energy. And then when she's in the underworld, she still has like a touch of that, but with like dark green lipstick and like sort of more sort of like paler tones and things like that. And I liked, Christy, you said a second ago, Hades, Demeter, Persephone myths and receptions of them tend to kind of fall into one of two camps. Either it's the abduction, assault, rape story that you see in the Homeric hymn, or it's a sort of inversion of that. I'm thinking there's an Eidolon article, I think it's called Rape or Romance, that's just talking about this exactly, about a feminist movement to sort of give Persephone agency by making it a voluntary romance, and then Demeter often gets sort of the short end of that stick and vilified, and then now we're sort of coming back around on the other end of sort of the push and pull of those two axes. And I found it interesting that the show actually kind of went for option 3, which is Persephone as sort of, I don't want to say villain, but as antagonist, right? Or she is an antagonistic figure in the, like, she's arguably one of the principal villains.
Yeah.
The triumvirate of Hades, Persephone, and Demeter.
Didn't know I needed this in my life.
I was also going to say Demeter's interesting because it seems a reaction. It's very appropriate today. Like a meme has been going around where it's like just a chart of all the different Blood of Zeus characters, and you put colored dots based on if you like, hate, or neutral about it. And like the pretty consistent one is everyone hates Demeter now.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because like she's definitely being portrayed, and Hades definitely gives her the benefit of the doubt that like I don't want Persephone in the underworld with me because it's terrible. Look what it's done to me. Look how it's aged me, sort of a thing. And like he doesn't want that for Persephone. He understands why her mother doesn't want that for her. And I think like this depiction of Demeter is going to stay fairly popular because it's kind of like the helicopter parent thing, right? You never really want your kid to grow up and you end up being overprotective of them, especially young girls, because of the threat of men in general to them. And so anyone who wants to be independent wants to break away from that. So I think that's going to be a really, like, that motif isn't going to go away anytime soon.
I mean, it's all wrapped up in, right, like how you feel about Demeter. I feel like ultimately comes down to like, how do you feel about your mom?
Pretty much.
Yes.
Would you want to rule Olympus with her?
Right. Who among us has a simple relationship with that person?
Yeah, no. Of course.
It's Sigmund Freud would really enjoy
Oh, yes.
our struggles with Demeter, I think. And I guess I wish, and maybe this is asking for the unreasonable perfect media, right? Like the perfect, absolutely 100% unflawed depiction of characters is just never going to happen, right? Because that's not interesting. We wouldn't make a podcast about that.
Right.
Like you need conflict, you need an antagonist, you need something to overcome. And so like you can't have perfect gods as much as we want them to be.
Well, and I think by perfect what I mean is sort of perfect by my indication of what I would love to see a reception of Hades and Persephone and Demeter to look like, where they do get to have these sort of jagged edges, but that there's a little bit more. I was really excited when we sort of first get Persephone and Hades talking in the garden, and Persephone has this thing where she's like, I know my mom means well. And she's, being a little overbearing. And later when she chooses to go into the underworld with Hades, she's like, I love you and I love my mom. And that those are two bonds that Persephone feels very deeply. And I wish we got to see more of why Persephone loves Demeter, because the way that Demeter is portrayed when we, the audience, get to see her, there's a reason why everyone writes that they hate her. She sort of commits also the call out to cordyceps was great.
I know.
I love any reference to cordyceps. Very
that
exciting.
has got to be a reference to what is it? Last of Us?
The Last of Us, but also, so I was like, I gotta go back and read more on cordyceps now. And that specific genus is Orpheocordyceps, I think, that gets mentioned in the show. It's an actual genus of cordyceps, and it's the one that takes over ants. And it is not just used in The Last of Us. It is also used in a novel that came out in 2014 called The Girl with All the Gifts, which is a translation of the word Pandora and is based on a short story called Iphigenia at Aulis. And I was like, wow, it's all coming together. And it was so cool to see that there's been this sort of this weird linking up of classical reception via cordyceps, the zombie fungus. I got really excited about that.
I think like why people hate Demeter though is we know Hades is acting, and like Hades commits the worst crime by the end, right? He stabs Heron, who has just about resolved the entire situation, because he really just wants his family to be together all the time. But Demeter kind of wants that, but she also just wants power for herself, right? Like she is ambitious. So she is willing to team up with her son-in-law, who she's not a huge fan of, / also her brother. Awkward.
They don't bring that into it at all.
It comes up. Somebody references, every now and then they say like sister or brother, but it's generally, and I think it's just an aspect of myth of like we just have to make our peace with it.
They specifically do it with like the ones who don't sleep around. So Zeus calls Hestia's sister.
Right. Yeah. Yep. But there's also no mention of Zeus being Persephone's dad.
Correct.
Which part of me is, I kind of wish that there was. Like, I think that if you're going to talk about the Greek gods and lean into all of their foibles, I think you got to talk about the incest. And I think it would be interesting to use that as motivators, especially in such a complicated story of these three figures.
I think Hera at one point mentions that she's Zeus's sister, but it's real quick. It's during the trial, I think maybe. But yeah, like, and also to the point, like Zeus is in the Homeric hymn, kind of the oldest version of this story. Zeus is, he's not in it a lot, but he's absolutely central to it because he's the one that gifts Persephone to his brother. And the whole, maybe one of the ways you can read this story and the sort of associated rituals attached to it is that it's all about marriage customs and dowries and bride gifting and things like that, and as it exists in ancient Greek cultures. And so yeah, Zeus's role, because Demeter kind of talks about in the show how like she wants Persephone to marry up, right? She wants to, you know, move up the sort of hierarchical social ladder, which is part of a larger thesis about the gods and why they're bad generally. But yeah, there's like a social climbing kind of dimension to it all.
Yeah, which ends up being the major conflict between Persephone and Demeter originally. Is just like she doesn't want to marry Ares. She doesn't want to marry the son of Zeus and Hera, because there's lots of sons of Zeus.
It's very Jasmine and Aladdin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And I guess getting back to my original point that I made my own tangent off of, I guess I just wanted to see more of her and Demeter, because they're asking us to read a lot into their relationship, and I think to put a lot of our own sort of, everyone loves their moms, even if they have complicated relationships, and therefore everyone will understand why Persephone feels this way. And I guess I just wanted a little bit more, because Demeter kind of sucks. I mean, she's cool. I like the gods in this show because they're so flawed, and that's sort of the point.
Yes.
I mean, that was a whole theme this season. It's like the gods are more flawed than we are.
Yeah, why are we listening to them?
So I'm not necessarily against Demeter being flawed or even Demeter being one of the antagonists, but I guess I just wanted more proof of why they have this tight relationship and what they actually mean to each other.
This seems to be like a larger kind of problem the show runs into, is you get the sense that there's so much that it wants to do, right? It felt like there was a lot of Athena that was sort of left on the cutting room floor, or a lot of Demeter that wasn't really gotten to, or a lot of Hestia, or like all of these other characters, right?
Hestia,
she got to shine.
Everything that's going on with all the bastards, that they have like a sort of loose alliance of like, we are the bastard sons of Zeus and we kind of stick together. It reminded me very much of Succession, where like, or not Succession, sorry, House of Usher, where there's like the family and the ushers, there's like a couple of them are from the first wife and a couple of them are from mistresses, and the sort of intertensions amongst the gods for these various reasons of like blood and family and things like that. And yeah, because it's only 8 episodes, each one's about 30-ish minutes, right?
And it bite size.
Like, a lot happens, right? There's a lot of locations, there's a lot of set pieces, there's a lot of characters, and it sort of feels a little bit like it just never quite got to do everything that it necessarily wanted to do.
And it might get to with like, you know, Hades claimed the Eleusinian stone. Like the deal he has with Demeter is still in place, right? And now they have this huge threat that they have to figure out. So maybe we will get a little bit more of that backstory between Persephone and Demeter as they try to, you know, solve a problem they've created.
Sure.
So, you know, it could still happen.
Oh, yeah. I'm hopeful.
Yeah.
So on this like kind of theme of like gods are flawed, that kind of comes out most conspicuously in I think the 4th episode, which is basically like Zeus on trial, right? Where Zeus goes down to the underworld and stands trial.
So good.
And to the point, like that's where the show's at its strongest, where it's most focused and it's the tightest, right? It's literally it's one big trial. And we're just getting sort of different set pieces and attestations. And like really the show is kind of the ultimate case for like gods, good or bad, is Zeus, right?
I was going to say it's both Zeus and Hera. Because that was our biggest kind of hang up the last time we talked, I think, was Hera. So I kind of want to tie those two together. Because we talked about how like Zeus was kind of having a redemption arc towards the end there in his sacrifice at the end. And then we're kind of left hanging with Hera, who we can see has this like, oh shit realization of like her righteous anger has been directed in the wrong way and maybe isn't worth the price it paid. And so, you know, one of the comments I saw of people who like weren't excited necessarily to see season 2 is because they thought Hera had been depicted as evil. And I don't think we ever talked to her about her being evil. Definitely villainous was kind of what we focused on. And I just kind of wanted to go with like Zeus's redemption and the judgment, but also Hera, confronting her family and more or less taking accountability and apologizing. And like, how do those compare? And thinking about like, that's the king and queen of the gods. And so they're kind of leading by example, which I thought was really cool and interesting.
Yeah, well, it feels so refreshing, and I feel like this is something that like every like undergraduate mythology class like wants to do is put Zeus on trial, right? Like we have so much to say about all of the bullshit that Zeus gets into, and we get so righteously angry, and it's so fun and satisfying to sort of be able to kind of twist those screws in a way. But I think, yeah, I like that it's sort of or not mirrored, but maybe foiled with Hera as this sort of like, oh, there is a way to maybe like find some redemption, get some, like, maybe not forgiveness is the word, but we all have to move forward. Like we all exist in the same world, and like how do we keep living with each other or being dead in the same place as each other. So yeah, I think it was kind of like a little mythology class fantasy in so many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't remember. I think it was Hades who said this, but to be honest, I watched all the episodes in a row, and therefore it's one big episode.
Yeah.
It's a 4-hour long movie in my head. But something that I thought was really nice and a nice little ring composition is towards the start of the season, someone says, and again, I'm pretty sure it's Hades, says, basically a man is measured by his willingness to admit when he's done something wrong and then take the steps to rectify those wrongs, right? And I think it's framed in terms of evil. I think now I'm putting it together. I'm pretty sure it's when Seraphim gets
That's what I was gonna
yeah,
say.
and I
Right?
think it's Radamanthus
It
says
might
that.
be
He's the-
one of the
Yeah.
kings.
Great.
Yeah.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, I can never die because now when I go to the underworld, that will be counted against me. But nevertheless,
the coin.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which I really liked. I thought that was a really fun mechanic.
It
Made me all
was.
excited whenever they tapped their staffs. I was like, ooh, dopamine hit. The coins are going to come.
It's like a slot machine.
It was a really nice foil for this whole season of like recognizing when you've done a wrong, even if you've been inspired to try and do these bad things for good reasons, like Hera trying to reclaim some of her identity and power in the face of a husband that is using her, or even Hades and Persephone trying to find a way for their family to be together safely and consistently. And that's a nice theme that gets pulled through the whole season. And then you get to the end and Hades doesn't even listen to his own judicial council's advice, right?
Yeah.
Like he acts completely he looks at the harm he's done, and clear, Persephone's confronting the harm that they've done, or namely that her mother's done, and sort of seems horrified by it. And he sees her horror and then he stabs Heron anyway. And so I thought that was really interesting because I think Hades and Persephone they're antagonists, but not necessarily villains.
Yeah,
right. You get a sense that the show wants you to sympathize with them.
Definitely.
And they're very emotional characters, and it's interesting for them to then after season 1 to make us sympathize with people and we're like, oh great, they're not bad, right? They're not going to do the bad things that Zeus and Hera have done in the previous season. And we get to instead watch the steps that they go to in order to do the bad thing. And I thought that was really fun. I liked that a lot.
It almost feels like, so the one episode I was able to rewatch before we chatted was when Hades is first trying to connect with Seraphim, and it's right after Seraphim's been judged and he's in Tartarus now, and I love Tartarus. We'll talk about that. And Hades does something really interesting where he's very upfront and honest with Seraphim, being like, yeah, you're right, I do need you, and here's why, like, I feel like we should be on the same side. And I wanted to empower you when I told you to eat of the giant's flesh. And I think that's really true in a lot of ways. But I think what's interesting is, we go to Seraphim's trial and he's like, no, I refuse to give in. I refuse to be accountable. And you guys, you kings, you suck. I agree with King Minos for sure. Like, yeah, why is he here? But anyway,
They're all sons of Zeus, basically. That's
yeah. But and he's kind of like, the kingdoms you left behind, like the righteous don't survive in. Like only men like me get to survive in it. And the whole premise we have with Hades is that he has been just and honorable this entire time, and look where it's got him. Like even to the very end when Heron declares, Hades, I need you to go back to the underworld, and he just can't, and he kind of just takes a page out of Seraphim's book at that point, right? Versus Seraphim is on a journey in the opposite direction of, maybe I should really think about forgiveness. And so I liked that in a lot of ways, that they created a relationship between those two. But Seraphim was also like, I still don't trust the gods. So like, Hades, I'm not your errand boy. I've got my own things to do. I'll catch you later.
I mean, Seraphim is falling into that tradition that we are seeing more and more frequently in popular media. Like, I'm thinking Killmonger or Thanos, or I keep thinking of Marvel examples. But like Zemo, these guys that like have legitimate grievances, but then just take their retributive steps a bit too far. And then, Seraphim is just very, as his whole trial lays out, is very casually murdering people left and right, guilty and innocent alike.
Since we're talking about Seraphim, I remember in season 1 talking about it with you all about the woman in the refrigerator trope and how that played into season 1 with Elektra.
Yes.
And I was like, let's go season 2. It's going to be great. And then we get Gorgo, who isn't named for almost
a long
the
time.
entire season.
Yeah.
Who has no personality and no plot outside of dying tragically so that Seraphim can feel bad about himself, and that there could be proof of him doing one good thing, which is apparently plucking plums from a tree for her. Sorry, I didn't realize
flowers. He gave her a bouquet.
Oh, that's true. I'm so sorry. That's
He
all a woman
romanced her.
needs. I didn't realize how mad I was about this until I brought it up, but it was really frustrating. I felt like we didn't need that.
No.
Yeah, I agree. It completely
served almost no plot purpose except to give him sort of something that he was fond of. But that, honestly, it could have been like a dog.
Yeah.
Like, she was so unimportant
or the bear
as a character.
I was going to say, we have the nurse character who raised him.
Right.
Yes, that's
he's
true.
Somewhat complicit in her death. We've got his mother, right? That seems Elektra. That seems to be and I guess the idea, right, where that comes up in like the Labyrinth trial, where it's like, if you could go back and like change one thing about your life, right? He had a junction point where he could have run away with this woman or seek vengeance, and he chose vengeance, and it brought about all this bad stuff. That's like, I think like it is like that exact moment is like why the character exists sort of narratively. That being said, I completely agree. She very much falls into a fridging trope.
Yeah. But like, he kills their mother, and in his trial, they talk about, what that feeling was because you witnessed the murder of somebody that you really loved and who helped raise you, and you did that to someone else. And I think that could have been like a very interesting like diversion point of like, maybe you don't choose to inflict pain. Maybe you can choose to just go any different direction, because I think that would have tied back together.
And we get that kind of foil to that when Heron goes back to his town and rescues the people who used to be absolutely horrible to him and his mother and treated them like shit and abused them terribly. And then he sees one of the bullies, or that bully's too weak of a word, but like one of those perpetrators, and has the thought, right? And then Alexei basically calls him out on this at one point. She's like, the reason I followed you is because I thought you would do the good thing. And then he chooses not to basically be a dick about it.
Yeah.
Whereas like that's the sort of core divide between him and Seraphim.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it feels like Gorgo, they couldn't figure out how to build that relationship between Hades and Seraphim without like a joint love story.
A parallel, yeah.
And so like because otherwise his redemption is through the love of his brother, right? Or the forgiveness of his brother and rebuilding that relationship. You could have done it with the mom. Hades could have done enough to show that like his mistreatment by his brother and loss of power, right, of the throne that he thinks he deserves is very similar to Seraphim's. I feel like they could have connected on a lot of levels that didn't require Gorgo, and that's been a kind of consistent complaint of like, here's a romantic female love interest that redeems the man, because we said that of Electra and Zeus.
Yeah.
Zeus has been hooking up with women for thousands of years, but this one changed him.
Yeah, and I think I was gonna say exactly that, Christy. I think also there's this Gorgo's shade gets stuck on the other side. She can't enter the underworld.
Correct.
Because no one was able to pay her way.
Yes,
But-
I had a question about this.
But she's buried in the Kerameikos, which is the hero.
I know, by the
cemetery.
Diblon Gate.
I know. I was like, ooh, Athens. Okay. But she's buried in this extremely elaborate, fancy cemetery that's reserved for heroes. So who?
I was under the impression that all Seraphim had to do was find her body and give her the coins.
Right. Me too.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe because the limb ripper, whatever they called him. I know he has a
tree.
real
The
name.
pine bender.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
I know he has a real name.
Pinus, I think. Is
Yeah.
what this-
It seems like, doesn't he kind of like throw, or maybe her body was eaten, so like people knew what happened to her and they just
This is opening
set
up
up a grave.
the thing that I don't like to do in fantasy and sci-fi, but what are the rules of the underworld? Like, okay,
Yeah.
like if you don't have a body, can you pay the way, right? What if
Yeah.
you
Sure.
if you set up a memorial, right? That's like or a cenotaph or something like that. Does that fulfill? Is it more about remembering or honoring the dead? Is it actually just about the physical act of placing the coin on the eyes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which this is the exact kind of thing I don't like to get into, like I said, but it had me think, something when stuff like this happens, I start thinking about it and then I get taken out.
Yeah.
And it's very apparent that Hades can bend all these rules, right? Like
Yeah.
Right.
to make sure Seraphim gets passage to the underworld. He does the traditional thing, goes up, put some coins on his eyes. I'm like, all right, now you're coming my way.
Right.
But
yeah.
Seraphim's been sentenced to torture in Tartarus for a millennia, forever, basically.
Yeah.
But Hades is like, I can let you out. Here's your
Yeah,
human
it's
form
fine.
again. And it's like,
let's
what?
go for a walk.
Yeah. Why not? And it's very apparent, and maybe that's the other reason Gorgo exists, is that it now becomes the motivator for Seraphim to do what Hades wants. And like, at least Hades is very
Right.
upfront about it. But the other thing I don't like is that like part of Seraphim's requirement for doing this is like he wants, and Hades offers the water of Lethe so
Yeah.
that she can forget what he did. And I'm like,
yeah.
that is a typical man response to be like, I don't want to be thought poorly of, so here we go.
What's the easiest solution for me and my guilt that I feel?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I guess also I can understand her Gorgo functioning in the plot in that way. But again, I think that it could have been compelling to have it be his nursemaid.
Yeah.
That's
Oh, yeah.
stuck on the other side. And
Yes.
even more compelling because we have a whole season of that relationship already in place.
Yep.
It was really jarring to have Seraphim, who we love and
Yeah.
thirst for, but is not a romantic lead in any way, shape, or form, which is kind of why I think we liked them all so much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I say we. I'm including you all in my personal experience.
I thought you were
from
just
last
talking about the
season.
internet generally.
Well, because we complained about Heron and Alexia, right? Of like that force is like, dude, they've literally had like no time to
know.
sit down and talk to each other.
I know. Which, there was like no
Yes.
chemistry this season between them. And I was like, yes,
Yeah.
let's do it.
Yeah.
But so it was just really weird. Also, I uniformly almost always love the costumes or the character designs in
Mhm.
Blood of Zeus. Why does Gorgo, why is she a nun?
It's a shorthand. That's, to get to,
Right.
so we know that she's a priest without having
She
to
is
explain
she's a
like
priest.
what priestess is
But like you
actually
can just
dressed
say
like.
priestess so early and then we're like, yes, okay.
And
it
I
was
think
so
also
weird.
To do for the benefit of like, so again, the shorthand of like, so we can understand that like she's not supposed to be meeting men on the side or
Sure.
something.
Right.
And they
guess,
throw
yeah.
in being a priestess of Artemis later, and you're
Mhm.
like, okay, a virgin priestess, et cetera, et cetera. But
Yeah.
I guess the other problem is that she doesn't take her habit off
Mm-mm.
later.
And has bare shoulders. That was the thing that I thought was a little odd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was like I'm a nun, but also I can have my hair like a just perfect, beautiful curl
Yeah.
out
Naturally.
that's always in front of my face,
Mhm.
and but also the rest of me isn't covered. It just
Yeah.
it didn't translate very well for me
Yeah.
personally.
No, I
Yeah.
completely
And obviously,
agree.
the Parloponides brothers were thinking of me exclusively when they
Mhm.
made the show. So
Yeah, I feel like they could have easily just said virgin priestess. It's like 2 words because
Right.
I feel like they talk like Hestia introduces herself
Hey-
at some
hey.
point.
Well, I say we can stop right here because our whole point is like we don't really necessarily need this character, so
Yeah.
True.
why are we
Get
arguing
out.
about
Right.
the headwear?
Well, can I talk about my love for Hestia real quick?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Let's talk about Hestia.
Why is she just like a rocket ship? I am obsessed.
They can all fly. Whatever. They're
I
gods.
know,
That was something
but
that
like she
didn't
like
bother me
had
at
a
all. They're
tail.
gods. They
She
can
had
do
like
whatever
a
they want.
fire tail, and I was just obsessed. I love that she's just like an absolute little like firebender, and it made me so happy because I think you could have easily made Hestia like grumpy, dour, dumpy.
Yes.
Wait,
Like
have you seen her characterization in Hades 2 yet?
Only
No, I
still,
have
so I
not.
don't know.
Okay, because that's definitely how they have portrayed her artistically, is what you are imagining.
okay.
It reminded me of that joke from one of the, I think it's Endgame, where like Scarlet Witch shows up and like blows up a spaceship or whatever, and then somebody's like, "Why was she in the back the entire time? Like, where was she this whole time? Like, we should have opened with that move."
Yes.
Yeah. I like, because we complained, it's like, where's Athena? Like, what is she doing? And like, so she got a little bit of that too.
Yeah.
And I thought the first episode was so smart because it'd been so long
Mhm.
since the first season that we're like, okay, we're going to go back to the Gigantomachy part deux, and we're
Mhm.
going to like kind of show things that are familiar, but show you what was going on the side too. Like Zeus planning for the eventuality that he's not going to come out of this.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it explains why Athena and Hestia are conspicuously absent from the
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I loved Athena too.
Yeah,
Mhm.
she was great. Well, she was like the SWAT team leader, and she was like, "When I move, you move," and like
Yeah.
I don't know,
Yeah.
it was really fun.
That whole
The encarpment. I loved it. It's like,
I know.
big words, Athena.
Garbage.
And I love too that she's I guess technically a bastard, except she's just born of Zeus. So I'm not sure, she's sort of
What
like
camp she falls in.
right, but I like that she's in. They seem to be really leaning on Athena and Justice as sort of like she's got that Athena Justice coding. But I also really liked the SWAT leader aspect
It's exactly what I thought
of her character. Yeah.
I also like that like Zeus tapped Hestia for this task and like kind of leaves unsaid the reason why, but you get the overall impression. Like what I liked about it is that they gave Hestia a chance to shine because she is just a very domestic goddess, right? We don't think about her being superpowered Azula or anything like
Yeah.
that, but she is holding her own. But more importantly, she doesn't allow herself to be corrupted by the Eleusinian stone. And like there's that moment she has after she gets the stone back and Zeus has obliterated himself with lightning.
Yep.
And they look at each other and Hestia like, it's like, what are we going to do now? And Hestia is like, I'm going to do what I said I was going to do.
Yep.
And she
Right.
relinquishes the power. And I thought that was just so cool. And if we only got one episode of Hestia, they did a good job
It
of
was
making her
great.
shine in it.
I loved it so much.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the Eleusinian stone, I guess? Because
Yeah.
The MacGuffin.
I know.
Gotta
It's
have
like
one.
there has to be a thing.
That or the Sword of Troy, like was a season 1 MacGuffin.
All right. I much prefer this to the Sword of Troy. The Sword of Troy is not even a MacGuffin. The Sword of Troy is a like decorative toothpick in a salad. Like it doesn't belong there and it serves no function and it's just weird and distracting.
That's fair. I meant from season 1, the sword that Zeus made, but like same difference, right? It needs to
Well, yeah, I forgot. We have 2 MacGuffins. But,
Yeah.
But let's talk
I
about
just-
MacGuffin number 1.
I don't enjoy the stone. I think it's dumb. I'm just like, oh, it's a big powerful stone. It's like it's a infinity stone. It's a tesseract.
Yeah,
it's like
it did.
I like a magic sword better than just a rock.
I wish it was the Omphalos.
Eli
right?
alienating every geologist. I'm so
Well,
sorry.
I mean, there is a legit powerful rock in Greek mythology, and it's the Omphalos, right? Like the
Yeah.
stone
Sure.
given to
Okay.
Kronos to,
Yes.
to trick him so he doesn't swallow Zeus. And then it becomes, it gets dropped down where the eagles meet for the center of the world in
Right.
Delphi,
Yes,
of course.
yes, naturally.
And so, there is a really important stone in Greek mythology. So it's like I was expecting it to be the Omphalos, actually. But they made the distinction very clear. It's like, no, those were little grumbly rocks moving around in a blanket, and then these are shiny infinity stones.
Yeah. When Hestia touches it, I was like, oh, it's the Palantir from Lord of the Rings.
Yep.
And this is Pippin.
Yes.
touching what he's not supposed to be touching. And I think I don't know if that was an intentional nod, but I was like, ooh, I like that. And then it didn't go where I thought it was going, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm sad now. It's not.
I would love to see a Hestia takeover of Olympus, because that feels very appropriate. But
yeah, especially since the whole point of the stone is it should go to someone who can't be corrupted by it.
Yeah.
So shouldn't
seems
it
like
be
she
the one
qualifies.
person
Yeah.
who's not actually interested in pursuing power beyond sort of what she currently has?
And it's also confusing because there's more than one stone that we see, right? That you draw lots from.
It serves sort of two functions, right? Because on the one hand, it's like Typhon's prison, and so it's like the nuclear codes or whatever. Like if it gets into the wrong hands or something is.
I didn't think about it like that.
Yeah, but it could destroy the world potentially,
right?
And so, but it simultaneously is also the crown that symbolizes whoever controls it is king of Olympus. So it's kind of doing these two things.
Yeah.
Which has crazy implication. I mean, I guess that sort of makes us, now I'm walking myself back from it, because I'm like, oh, I guess it makes sense. It's you need someone you can trust to be in charge of the stone, and then therefore that person should be king. But on the flip side, it's also our king has the power to destroy us all. But then it's also why would anybody let Typhon out of the stone?
Right.
Unless you're Gaia.
Well, we're going to find out.
Yeah, spoiler, unless you're Gaia and you teach everyone a lesson.
Oh my god, I loved Gaia.
Yeah.
Gaia was so cool.
Oh, yeah.
I was so excited when she did her first, let me just sort of summon a mountain and then appear. I was like, oh, yeah, you're so cool, bestie.
Yeah. And she's just pissed off at all her grandkids. Yes. You guys, come on.
Yeah. There's been so much. I mean, for season 1, of course, was really focused on the family ties between father and son. But there's been so much mother and mother figures in this season, which was cool and fun to see.
Yeah. So with the stones and the Eleusinian, which I'm guessing is a reference to Eleusis, right? Which also ties pretty closely to Demeter and Persephone. But the other thing that I think it was interesting to try and answer is before them, Kronos ruled everything, right? And he ruled the golden age of men, where apparently things were pretty great for the mortals. And what I do love is that guy is pointing out, it's you guys are terrible for mortals. You're just so bad. And the mortals are just getting killed left and right. Well, shenanigans are happening. And so the idea is checks and balances is all right, we're going to split the 3 kingdoms up so that no one can be corrupted fully by the power, but this most powerful stone that actually matters is still held by the king of the sky, basically. I don't quite get it.
Yeah, and I also wasn't clear on why Hades wanted the stone, because the way that it was portrayed at the beginning made it sound like the stone's power would allow him to free himself from the underworld. And I guess that power is becoming the king of the heavens. Yes. But that's not really what he wants. I don't think he cares.
The mechanic is he can go to the surface, but only for short periods of time before it causes him pain. So maybe to counteract that, there is a magical element to this, because they never name her, but we get Hecate, right? As what's the word, a hologram for the majority. We get her in person as well, but usually as a hologram, which was interesting. But she's never named. And
she's just a witch from
the witch
East.
from Anatolia.
Yeah. Which I was looking at comments of like, who is she? She looks so cool. And I'm like, it's Hecate, but they never named her. And it was interesting because they made her, very separate from all of the gods as, another arbiter outside of the pantheon in some ways, which makes sense. I did like that. She felt like a Siri or something, right? Like we summoned her when we need help
Sure.
Googling directions for something. And she's one of my favorites. So
yeah. Well, she also seems to be this like, they call her that, or they say that she's from. Is it Anatolia? Is that what they say?
Yeah, they say that's. I was trying to poke fun at it, and then I was like, maybe our listeners don't know that, or your listeners haven't heard it called Anatolia, which is how I normally
That's
would.
how I would
pronounce
normally say
modern day
it.
Turkey
Yes.
for all of you still confused at what.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I
like-
don't know how saying Anatolia doesn't help you understand what Anatolia is. So
In the show's defense, in Greek, the accent is on the E.
oh no, I take it all back. I'm so sorry.
But like, she's coded as like almost not Greek, right? Like she's
Yeah.
some kind of foreign outside force. So are there other outside gods? Like, I don't know. Are we gonna get some like weird Viking
ISIS? Are we going to get Egyptian
or
gods?
Egyptian gods? Like I'm like,
Yeah.
this could be cool. Okay.
That could be, especially if your big bad is Typhon and you need reinforcements.
Right? Let's get ISIS up here.
Yeah.
There's also Kofi mentions some of his deities.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I didn't get the chance to look them up to see if they're real deities from an African pantheon.
It wouldn't surprise me.
I would
But
imagine, yeah.
right, considering the depth of like research that went into the show,
Yes.
I wouldn't be surprised. The one thing about Hecate's, or the unnamed witch goddess from Anatolia's design made me think of Hindu deities.
Yeah.
And like Kali, the Hindu goddess of war and destruction with the multi-arms. And I thought that was really interesting.
Hecate's usually tripartite, right? She
Yes.
has three heads or
Mhm.
three bodies,
Yeah.
or is three-faced in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And she is often depicted in Roman art anyway, with like her arms sort of akimbo, holding like,
Mhm.
Yeah.
so the static set of arms felt
Yeah.
very in a Hecate pose. I know Christy's got visual
I know. I was looking at
media.
the poster for reference
I
again.
know.
Yeah.
Just like turn around, like, oh yeah.
Well, I mean, she's got a bloody knife in one hand and a torch in the other, and I'm like, I'm loving it. So.
But her whole sort of the multi-armed thing, I haven't seen from the ancient Roman or Greek world, but I would be totally open to being wrong because that would be cool.
Yeah, I think it's a because you can see statues where it's like three, so you have a
Right.
face, and then extra limbs that way. So maybe just a reinterpretation of it, as well as drawing from those Hindu gods to really,
yeah.
because again, most people don't know that Anatolia is modern day Turkey or from the
Right.
east, so signifying that to us in a way that we would recognize in a form of a god, basically.
Yeah. I also wonder if we'll start to get more Eastern characters like Dionysus.
Yes, please.
I would love to see Dionysus just cause mayhem.
Yes.
Yeah. Besides
please.
spitting in the faces of people with wine as his
Yes.
choice of fighting.
Yeah.
Because that's all we've got so far.
I know, but
He also didn't show up to like, why can't I rule Olympus? I too am a son of Zeus.
Right?
Where is this man? This guy? This god? Bring him in.
justice for Dionysus.
Justice for Dionysus.
He's got better things to do, probably. He's like, cordyceps.
I think he's there. He's just in the background and he doesn't do much. There's a god that you see occasionally. He's got ivy leaves in his hair.
Well, I'd like him to do
Oh.
more things.
Yeah, I need him to be involved.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a big question, y'all. What do we think of Heron this season, our protagonist?
Boring.
I think the humans are the weakest link in this show. Kofi and Alexia and Evios have nothing to do for like half the episodes, and then Evios just disappears entirely.
Yeah, he pieces
Yeah.
out.
Which I assume is set up for the next season.
Yes.
I would think so.
But I think it's really telling that you asked us what we think about Heron, and we immediately started talking about the other humans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
Heron
not-
is the message, right? Like the overall message.
Yeah.
He's the arbiter, not of justice, but forgiveness. Because like that's kind of what this idea is like. people who look for justice, if you really think about what justice is, especially, you know, in the ancient world, it's like an eye for an eye, and it just perpetuates the violence and the anger that exists between everyone. And I mean, he's really interesting. Like, I don't know, he's almost a Jesus figure as a result, because
Yes.
we are preaching a new approach that is meant to end the cycle of violence that exists between all of these
Exactly
people.
that.
And he's the prophesied one to
Ugh.
come
Yes.
and save
Gross.
everyone. And then also he has to basically die in order to fulfill it. Yeah, I was a bit bored by the Jesus stuff.
Yeah. And that's what's really hard, I think, about media, because I wanted to, I hated on Heron a lot last season. But I've watched some things that have pointed out it's like it's so difficult to find good male figures for, young boys, young men to look up to. And like one of the few that people can point to is Iroh from Avatar. What were the other top two? One was Bandit from Bluey, the dad. And who was the other one? So Iroh, Bandit, and for like an actual young boy, Ryder from Paw Patrol. I hang out way too much with my niece and nephew, so like,
I have no idea
but
what that is.
Yeah, I
like
don't-
it is so hard. And like, look at us gushing over Seraphim, who's just like vengeance the whole time.
Yeah.
When Heron, I liked that his story took a bit of a back seat. And I like the message, right? Of like, why we are always so mad at Zeus, why we're always so mad at the gods for being flawed, is because at the end of the day, they don't hold themselves accountable. They don't forgive. They just perpetuate the things that we don't really actually want to experience. But damn, it makes a good story. And
Yeah.
that's so hard to contend with.
Well, and I think also one of the scene that was the most interesting with Heron was when he, as Colin has already mentioned, when he confronts the abusers
Mm-hmm.
in his hometown. And he has that moment where he's like, what would feel better in this moment is me absolutely destroying this man.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was one of the best moments of Heron having this flashback to the abuse that he and his mother received and being confronted with this choice and then making the harder choice, in part because he sees the kid and is like, I can't do what to this kid what these adults did to me when I was a kid by abusing my mother and abusing me. And then we don't get any of that. And I feel like one of the reasons why we relate so much with Seraphim is he's so human. I mean, I don't regularly go out and like chop people in half. In general, I kind of find gushy bits gross, but we can relate so much more to a really imperfect character that's trying to do good than we can to a perfect, pretty man who's now a Jesus figure. And so I think a lot of the love for Seraphim comes from that. We can all really relate to, or maybe not, again, not to the killing people wildly, but this desire for hurting people who have hurt you is such a human motivator. And so I think, not that I think that Seraphim is a good role model for the young men of the world. Maybe he's a good model for what not to do.
Right. And like, I think one of the other, my favorite moments is when they're at the Karamakos and Heron's having a conversation with his mother about like him trying to reconcile his own feelings about his brother and what happened. And Seraphim's about to just stab him in the back.
I know.
Because, convenience. But like, in hearing, Heron is grappling with that decision. So I'm glad it's just not like an automatic, it's like, oh yes, turn the other cheek the whole time. It's him really grappling with that decision himself. Like he's being told to do that. He's struggling with it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what also starts Seraphim down the path of like really thinking about, is the path I'm on the right one?
Sure. So much of Greek mythology is just an exploration or a meditation or like a negotiation on human nature.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that does really come through in this story. And I think it's something that I do really enjoy about it. Is that it's really messy.
Yeah. I think it's like Heron's not an exciting character, but he's a necessary one. Like, I'm glad he's there because he's the one that's going to allow for the growth of all of these characters that are a lot more flawed than he is. So
he's the refrigerated woman now.
that he is.
It's true.
I mean, I'm assuming he'll come back in the next season. I mean, how can you have another season of Blood of Zeus without Heron? But
yeah.
And that's justice, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there we go.
We should just end it on that.
We still haven't talked about all the Easter eggs yet.
I know.
Well, I guess, should we get into that?
All right, let's Easter egg because I'm sleepy.
Okay, the first one, opening scene, the guys wearing the theater masks. I forget, like, their shades or whatever.
I think they're supposed to be the Aneroy, like the dreams, I think.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I loved that. So another archaeology one is the water clock.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So cool. And
you mentioned
then
the Kerameicus and the Dipolon Gate.
Yep. That reference. And then
which are neighbors in Athens for listeners.
Which we talked about. I'm wondering if like they heard us talk about like, hey, you want to go see some great geometric pottery? Go to the Kerameicos Museum because it's so cool. So, and then mythological reference that I absolutely loved is during the funeral games, you see, I think Hermes offer a discus to Apollo, and Apollo just puts his hand up and goes, "Nah, they."
No, it's Hyacinthus. I think he I assumed that was Hyacinthus.
I thought it was Hyacinthus too.
The Hyacinthus gives Apollo a jab. Yeah, because also for listeners, Apollo kills Hyacinthus with a discus accident.
Yeah. And then I asked on social media, I posted about this other one where we see Electra in Elysium, and she's walking through the fields.
That's that
Demeter has made. Gladiator, right? That was such a Gladiator reference.
So Gladiator.
And the song that plays during that scene in Gladiator is called Elysium. So I'm like, that has to be. That just has to be a Gladiator reference.
Oh, yeah. No, the Kerameicos was one of my favorites just because it's so classic. It was so much fun to see. And just all of the landscapes, so beautiful. Just like season 1, the backgrounds just make me so happy. I just want like that as my desktop. Like even like the underworld, even being in Tartarus was just like so cool.
Mm-hmm. We get a lot of Tartarus Easter eggs, right? Sisyphus, Tantalus.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Whoever the giant is that gets his liver pecked out.
Was it not Prometheus?
That's Prometheus.
No,
and
there's
he's
another
supposed
guy.
to be. Oh, okay.
Hand to God, there's a giant in the underworld who also gets his liver pecked out by an eagle.
Okay.
Dang.
Because I'm like, he's supposed to be in the Caucasus. What is he doing down here?
Tityos is the guy's name.
There was also, when I was watching it again, because that was episode 2, there, like, Zeus flies across, and there is, like, an ensconced giant monster in ice. And I couldn't figure out if that's supposed to be Typhon, but they very clearly say Typhon is under Mount Etna. So, like, I'm not sure if whatever is ensconced in ice in the underworld, if that's supposed to be Titans, maybe, because we know more Titans are kept in Tartarus, or if that's Typhon. But it felt like they really tried to show Typhon being under lava in Mount Etna. So, I'm not sure.
There's the Seraphim's punishment in the underworld is the snake dripping. That's from Loki, or that's what happens to Loki.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
They don't show Ixion.
That would be too fun. Ixion is too fun to take seriously because he's strapped to a flaming wheel and rotating around at all times.
I think that could
Now
be,
we know what Colin does
really,
on a Saturday night.
Exactly.
I did like the little because Seraphim's strapped next to Tantalus, and like when Hades first tries to go, it's like, here, have some water. It's like, you never know how thirsty you are until you're down here. Just ask that guy. Tantalus is just like, There's the other one, the way that Seraphim gets into the Hidden Realm by giving the guards, the Curites, Lethe, and then like telling them he's nobody. I like,
that did make me smile.
A classic.
I forgot that one. Classic.
One thing that first episode talking about Aneroy, and that whole sequence felt very Assassin's Creed Odyssey to me.
Sure.
Both the theater masks, both as reference to, of course, actual historical theater masks, but also they feature really heavily in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. All of the sort of like ninja jumping around. I mean, you're not a ninja in Assassin's Creed, but you're functionally a ninja. And even the like using the bird to distract a target and then jump on top of them to assassinate them, that's like a move from the game.
Mm-hmm.
And I just taught a class on this game, so I'm all like, let's look for Assassin's Creed references. And I don't know if any of that was intentional, but I hope it was, because it's really cool. It was a really nice nod to other media in a way that they do so nicely throughout this whole show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're blending modern memeable culture into the show with ancient memeable culture, right? All in one,
Yeah.
and it's so good. They posted recently that for the funeral games, they really emphasize like the wrappings they use for the boxing the Pigmachia,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and they showed the bronze statue that
Oh,
inspired that
yes.
with the cauliflower ear,
Yeah.
and they
So
also
good.
suggested that like Hera's braid was inspired by the caryatids on the
Oh, very
Erechtheion.
cool.
So like they're also looking at the material culture and very much
Yeah.
incorporating that into the world building.
There was also a bilingual vase in
Yes.
the underworld. So that is a vase that has red figure pottery on one side and black figure on the other. And we see them sort of from this transitional period in classical Greek pottery making, Athenian pottery. And that was really cool to see too. I got all excited about that.
This does make me excited for a season 3. This has more of a cliffhanger than the last season did. So I'm looking forward to like tying up all the little loose ends, because I feel like they did start a lot of wheels turning, and I think it could be really fun knowing what they did with season 1 to like see what they could do to wrap all this up.
I know that they're also like they've been pushing really hard for the success of this, and they've talked openly by saying like, you know, if this goes well, then our Medusa project will get off the ground, which I would love to see, especially because we also have a moment with in episode 1, Athena and Alexia have a moment of like, hey,
Yeah.
and they're like, we're gonna go venture later together, yeah, and then like it moves on. But I'm like, could that be a thing? That would be so fun.
I did think of my last thing that I wanted to say. I love that they decided to continue with the sort of very soft launch of a threesome when we get sort of Heron peeping on Evios and Kofi sleeping. And I strongly disagree with the fact that Evios and Kofi aren't in a relationship together.
Yeah.
Those men have known each other biblically. But I love that they were like, we gotta put another threesome in here. It wouldn't be a Blood of Zeus season without a threesome with
True.
no context or explanation.
Yep. Love it.
I have one final like Easter egg question. Do you guys think all the fact that like the name that shall not be named, is that like a Voldemort reference without being directly referencing Voldemort?
I
Because
think
like that's not a thing, is it?
I think it evokes Voldemort, whether
Yeah.
I don't know if that's intentional, but I mean,
'Cause
I
I
think
guess-
really it's more of a holding off on the name until it, we
Yeah.
get to say it. But
Right, yeah.
I guess you have that with Hades, right? Like
Yeah.
the Greeks didn't say Hades, they
Right.
would say Pluto because they don't want to invoke him and invite him.
Yeah. And there was a nice nod to that too when he was like, they talk about the wealth that I
Mhm.
have and all the treasures I have in the underworld. And that was a nice call out to the Pluto, as in
Mhm.
wealth, as in
Yeah.
plutocracy.
There we go.
Yep.
Last thoughts?
You just want to end with like everyone quickly say your favorite episode and then call
I was
it.
going to say, what's your favorite punishment in Tartarus?
Oh,
Ooh,
Mine's Ixion. Guy gets strapped to the
Okay.
flaming wheel and rotates around for infinity.
sure.
I like Sisyphus simply because of the old Cat Diary video that has the line like Sisyphus, I am bound to hell, and I don't know, it just sticks in my mind really well. So I'm gonna say Sisyphus, especially because you show him like struggling and being crushed, and then he has to do it
Yeah.
again.
Yeah. Well, I know it wasn't like explicitly whatever the eagle eating the liver guy was, but I do think my favorite is like Prometheus's punishment is one of my favorites because it's just so dramatic
Mhm.
and like full of trauma. And yes, that's one of my favorites.
They didn't feature in this season, but I like the Danaids
I was about to add,
a
yeah.
lot. Of course, Zoe coming in with the the women. The Danaids, for those of you who are unfamiliar, are 50 sisters that basically it's like 7 wives for 7 brothers, except they kill them at the end. And they get punished in Tartarus. They're forced to sort of carry water between 2 locations, but their jugs have holes in the bottom. So it's this same idea of Sisyphus, this sort of unending task.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the tedium and the infiniteness of it all.
Yeah, I would hate that. That would be
Yeah.
horrible.
Because you'd be wet on top of everything else.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah, that's true.
Be so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I feel like you're with your sisters, so it's just, you know,
True.
You
You
get
just
to
like
chat.
chat all day.
could be so it's
Without
own
your
hell,
husbands,
but-
you're like, this isn't so bad.
Right, like, we did what we wanted to set out to do, and now we just get to, like, gossip
forever.
forever while being wet.
I have no sisters, so maybe that is torture. I don't know.
Yeah, I also don't have sisters, so maybe this is very false.
They weren't quite there yet, but the true Tartarus punishment would be like Start Snow Exit, where you're just in a hotel room with 3 people you hate.
Oh my god.
I've been to field schools like that.
Yeah, right. No.
All right, so we can end it there. Zoe, thank you so much for coming on the show. If listeners want to read or hear more from you, where can they do that?
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure again. I am on Twitter. My handle is Archiadne, and it is spelled terribly. So it is ARCHAEADNE, because I tried to do archaeology in Ariadne and made that monstrosity. It is private, but that's for no particular reason. So feel free to follow if you're interested. It's mostly to keep the bots out. Otherwise, that's kind of it. I will be having a chapter published if you want to read more of my thoughts about Demeter and motherhood in the romance genre, reception of Hades and Persephone. That will be coming out probably next year. It's called Persephone in Love. The editor is Dr. Ellie Mackin Roberts. So that should be coming out hopefully next year. So if you want to read more of my rambling thoughts about motherhood and society and sociology and reception, that will be there.
Nice.
Yay.
Excellent. Listeners, thank you again. As always, you can find us on most major streaming platforms and follow us on social media on some variation of @DigMovies, as well as our website, movieswedig.com. We'll be back soon with an interview with the creators of Blood of Zeus, Charlie and Blas Parloplanides. And until then,
Bye.
bye.
Bye.